My father's ability to reform the Navy, I think, had an awful lot to do with his upbringing. His mother received her MD before she could even vote in this country. So when Dad opened up the Naval Academy to women, he had that same confidence in the human capacity of any individual to do anything that they really wanted.
He was able to connect with people from a wide range of backgrounds. The way I met Admiral Zumwalt was I was curious about the Navy, and I was fortunate that I wrote him a letter and he wrote back and said, "Come in, let's talk."
Historians say that it takes about 20 years to change a culture. Admiral Zumwalt did it in 4.
He took command of the Navy in July of 1970, and the Navy, particularly back then in 1970, was far behind the other services.
When Dad became Chief of Naval Operations, he took over one of the most sexist, the most racist of all of the military branches.
I'm a retired Rear Admiral, 34 years in the United States Navy. I'm part of the legacy of Admiral Zumwalt. He is someone who has done more for minorities and women than anyone has done in the history of the United States Navy.
He literally thought way ahead of his time and had enormous confidence in the American people.
Bill Norman actually served with Admiral Zumwalt. The thing that I took away from talking to Mr. Norman was Zumwalt's passion for sailors being able to reach their full potential. He was very clear-minded about that.
Just did a tremendous job of leveling the playing field for all those who served in uniform, regardless of race or gender. Enabled the first women to fly aircraft.
Under his watch, the first female aviator got her wings.
He promoted the first woman to flag rank. He promoted the first African American to flag rank.
One of them was a person I actually personally knew, which is Admiral Samuel Gravely. And Admiral Gravely made flag officer during the time when CNO Zumwalt was the Chief of Naval Operations.
A lot of changes that were hugely unpopular at the time.
And he wasn't ready to take a second to let things slow down.
They believed he was changing the course of the Navy. So he took a lot of heat for it. But I also knew that what my dad was doing was the right thing, knowing that the changes he was implementing and that he believed in were changes for the better. And there was a statement that my dad would always say, and it sounded so simplistic, which is, you just got to keep leaning forward.
He was pushing forward constantly to correct the problems that he saw and everybody knew existed within the force, and to make the Navy a better Navy.
Never has one man shaped the Navy as much as the Admiral and his Z-grams.
Z-grams were messages from CNO Zumwalt to the fleet. The one that I'm most familiar with is Z-gram 66. Basically where CNO Zumwalt said there's not a black Navy, not a white Navy, just United States Navy.
History has been very kind to show that he was quite a visionary.
My father was credited by Time magazine as being the most popular leader since World War II, and taking the Navy kicking and screaming into the 20th century.
Admiral Zumwalt was the Chief of Naval Operations while I was in Vietnam, and I was a forward machine gunner on a Swift boat. I stood in a peak tank.
He, during his era, had to go from a draft system to an all-volunteer force. Re-enlistment rates were abysmal. It was the height of the Vietnam War.
Forgive me for the term, but we called it chicken shit in the Navy. And that was how your hair's combed, how your shirt's buttoned. When he took over at CNO, the Admiral realized that's yesterday's Navy. Guys were not re-enlisting in the Navy, not because they didn't like the Navy, but they didn't like the chicken shit. And he got rid of that.
He made it a more appealing service.
The enlistment rate just went a heck of a lot higher when he cut out all of that stuff. We concerned ourselves with doing the mission and staying alive, not how we would dress, whether or not we had sideburns, or we didn't have to worry about that when he took command. That's why it says reformer on his gravestone.
One of the things I really admire about my father is he was a man who used his rank and his position not for himself, but rather to transform others, whether it was an institution or individuals.
What Admiral Zumwalt had done in my life was take somebody from a very different background, try to see the highest and best talents that they have, and try to encourage them to use it for the good of the world. He was always making sure that I had a goal, that I was inspired, and he wanted to share what he had to make the world a better place.
If you take a look at the face of the Navy leadership today, it's entirely different today than what it was in 1970 to 74 when he first made those changes that made it possible for this generation of leaders to evolve.
Here it is, some 43 years later, after my father retired, that the vision of the Navy that he knew could be is today the Navy that is. It's pretty amazing.
He not only reformed the Navy in so many ways, this ship, which is vastly different than anything that has ever been built before, represents that same legacy. It will reform the future of the Navy.
I've been a volunteer to raise funds for the commissioning activities and the legacy investments, because we want to make sure that the world remembers what he did, and that the example of leadership that he set for us is timeless. We need somebody like that right now.